How do you qualify the supply side of your platform? That's a question that every marketplace leader has to answer, and they all land in unique places because every marketplace is unique. You have unique products and customers and positions. And we're going to talk with Thomas Vosper today, who's pretty much seen it all in this area, to help us think through objectively how we make the right decisions for each of our marketplaces on qualifying the supply side. Well, Thomas, I'm super grateful for you joining me today, my friend. Thomas has got a lot of wonderful things to say. He's recently published his first book, and having talked with him, second book on the way, and recently built a TikTok audience in less than 1 month to over 10,000 followers, which is just, incredible. As someone who cares a lot about content and brand and marketing, kudos, man. That is absolutely incredible. You're doing something right. But of course, that kind of content that you can put out that's really helpful comes from experience, which I know you have a lot of. You've built up the sides of marketplaces that make marketplaces what they are and make them fun at Amazon Merchant and Tesco back in the day, and spent the last 6.5 years in startups and founding A3.co, your current sneaker marketplace, which is incredible. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But all that to say, Thomas, you've got a lot of good experience. You've got a lot to say here. Is there anything you'd add, anything you'd like to share with the audience before we jump in?
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, it makes me sound super old, but then I guess kind of in my mid-40s, I kind of am. It does make my my school-age children laugh quite a bit when they think Dad's a TikToker, but it's definitely way more than that. As you say, it's been a long journey through e-commerce for about the last 17 years, since I was pretty early in the UK business at Amazon. Way before we even had Prime or Fulfilled by Amazon or anything like that, launching all those different categories, through to kind of slumming it in startup land for the last 6.5 years, being super scrappy, raising some money, raising some VC money, hiring and firing and building a business. It's exciting.
Yeah, that's incredibly exciting. And I love that you have, of course, just from all of your experience in different places, you've learned a lot. And you're taking that now into building A3.co. And you've talked about how this marketplace is really unique. You're kind of reverse engineering it in a way. And I think that'd be really helpful for us to hear what's unique about the marketplace you're building now, and what led you to build it this way.
Yeah, so I guess what's unique to us exists because it's really difficult building a marketplace. And so, having been in corporates and been in businesses, so, Amazon were well on their way to launching lots of different categories. But when I walked into Tesco, that was relatively new. And that seems like a lifetime ago. They're having another go at trying to build a marketplace onto their retail platform, which has a bunch of challenges when you have that kind of legacy infrastructure in place. But I speak to founders all the time, from founders trying to build service marketplace businesses, B2B products and marketplaces, and physical products as well. And ultimately, one of the reasons it's so difficult to build a marketplace is you have that two-sided marketplace problem. You need enough suppliers to make it attractive for a buyer to come to your site, and you need enough buyers for the suppliers to be bothered to appear on your site. And so that's the balancing act that's so difficult, but actually is probably an opportunity to try and do something a little bit differently. And that's how I think about marketplaces and how we think about that.
That's great. So what's unique about the way you've kind of reverse engineered A3.co?
Well, the biggest challenges that I used to see in my Amazon days, and then also going on to Tesco, was just how much hard work it can be for a new seller to appear onto a marketplace. And that's not getting easier. You'd think it might get easier, but it's not getting easier, because there are more and more channels now that you can sell your products on. And each of those channels have lots of different nuances, whether it's just the way that they have sizing, or, like red is red or scarlet or rouge, or, you're selling multi-channel and omni-channel and all of those buzzwords across lots of different platforms. It's really hard to pull all of that information together. And that's before you start thinking about the fact that most products should have some sort of global identifier, right? Some kind of barcode number or GTIN that's been issued from a proper organization like GS1, which, whether it's legacy issues because a lot of those numbers that were issued are unaccounted for, or there's laziness or a misunderstanding of the value of those numbers, that they're either absent or being made up when they go onto different platforms. And that just convolutes the issue even more and more. So it's super, super difficult for people to get onto a platform.
That's really interesting to me. What were some of the specific challenges that you saw, or how did that turn out in your experience before at Tesco and at Amazon?
Well, there's two different ways that I suppose there's one different way this has really been tackled in the past, and those two businesses took two very different approaches. And right now they three take a third. But let's go back to kind of let's say the big players, right? The traditional ways. You would work with, as a supplier, as a retailer, a brand, as a supplier, you would work with someone like a middleware, like a software, like a channel advisor, right? Big success story out of South Carolina, North Carolina, one of them. You've got Channel Advisor, Commerce Hub, Feedonomics, some very big businesses out of the US. There's equivalent businesses here in the UK, like Intelligent Reach, that are good feed companies. They work basically to get all of those retailers' data standardized onto all the different platforms. Okay, so that's a really good approach, but it works only when you take the approach of someone like Amazon, which is, we want everyone to come onto our platform. Where it was a real challenge when the Tesco made their first attempt at building a marketplace is they were over curating. And this is a challenge for anyone who's building a marketplace, and they think about that supply side, like, what's the balance here? Because the free-for-all of Amazon was almost controlled to some extent because it was quite mature as a marketplace. I mean, it was small in terms now, but still big. It was a $14 billion business at the time. But you could trust a big partner, a big feed provider with lots of clients selling in lots of different places and lots of enterprise clients to make sure that their products were represented the best way. If you kind of flip that on its head, like the way that Tesco would work would be highly, highly curated, almost too curated. So it's really difficult to go to a feed provider with 300 clients who will make their money as a business based on pushing out all their 300 clients to, let's say, as many channels as possible, and say, well, actually, we only want 2 or 3 of those clients, but you need to build a connector to us. And so one of the challenges, and I saw this a bit when I worked in my sort of first go as like an employee in a startup, was trying to build a price comparison site, a bit like Kelku, Price Runner, Shopzilla, and trying to aggregate products. We at IL3 tried to take the approach of saying, well, what would happen if we didn't have the barcode number that everyone is using to match products together? Like, let's just assume we never see it. We never need to know it, because quite frankly, we don't trust it. And so if that's your starting point, then you're going out and solving half of the two-sided marketplace, that supply side, by basically saying, well, let's just go and get that information. Let's figure it out ourselves. We're not going to ask anyone to put it in a certain way. We'll figure it out, and then we'll be responsible for showing that in the best possible light on our platform. And so that was the flip that we made versus going out and trying to get buyers and get suppliers. We thought, let's just solve supply side like immediately, effectively the way that Google did when they started to index products or everything as a search engine. They go out and find it.
That's really, really interesting, Thomas. That's great thoughts there. And There is, I love the contrast there between Amazon wants anyone and everyone on the seller side to come onto their marketplace at the time. And then conversely, you have this incredibly curated, over curated seller side of a marketplace as well. And you have to find the right balance so that, I mean, balance is the key word in marketplaces, right? Because kind of like you were talking about earlier, supply and demand have to constantly match. And you've found a way to make sure they always match, which is like solving one of the hardest problems in a marketplace. So that's really, really interesting. And I love the way you've thought through that. And I think it'd be fun to watch aisle 3 and see how you guys progress and grow too with all the success you've already had. I think a marketplace founder might want to ask at this point, like, what do I do to qualify my supply side? Like, what's too much and what's too little? And granted, every marketplace is unique. What are some ways that they can think through the right qualifications for their supply side?
You're exactly right. Every single marketplace and like those nuances between the buyers and suppliers, they are very different and very unique. I think about it slightly more as a structure that I learned at Amazon around decision making, and decision making being something called a one-way door or a two-way door. Now, I don't know if you've heard of this as a tactic, but effectively, when you're making a decision, is this a decision that you're going to open a door and step through to, and then that's it, you're in the room? You can't go back. There's no going back. You can't get back through that door. And so when you're balancing your supply side, that's probably the hardest part for you to work out. Like, how do you kind of throttle that to get to the point that, okay, let's say we were a marketplace and we are going to expand into a different category. And we do that. If you go into a different category, can you reverse that if it doesn't work? Does it have something negative around that actually you can then kind of eradicate that ever happened from existence and carry on focusing on what was working, right? Or is this a decision that you're going to have to live with? And that's everything you have to think. And it's easier to go up in increments than it is to start trying to wind stuff back. And that's how I think that's how I think most people building a marketplace probably need to think about, without being too cautious and too slow, because speed kills in these type of businesses. And
Yeah.
you have to take some sort of risk at some point.
Yeah, you do have to take risks. And that's a lot of the work of a marketplace, is knowing the right risks to take and the right time to take them. And so that's really good. I like the one way, two way door thought of it. How can they gauge whether this is the right door to walk through? Even say it's like we can get out of this. We know we can get out of this at some point if we absolutely have to. But I still don't know if this is the right move for us right now. Like, how do they decide what's the right way to build up this platform? What's the right way to build up our supply side? Do you have any advice for marketplace founders wrestling with that question?
That's fundamentally comes back to your values and your culture as a business, and what is that North Star or lighthouse or anchor tenant, whatever you want to call it, that you're aiming towards to try and fix. What is that thing that sits on your slide deck when you're going out for investment, or when you are trying to do some direct to consumer advertising to say, we are solving your problem? Like, what is it that you are solving? And is what you are going to look at trying to change or do going to help towards that? Even like not necessarily directly, even if it is indirectly, right? And I suppose it does vary quite a bit from the stage. If I think about, how I run a startup, and also how when I run a startup consultancy called Startup Lounge, when I talk to other founders, I help them try and understand, when you're making a decision, like, is it going to make more money? Like, does it make more revenue? Does it build a community, or does it bring more users or more buyers? Like,
Hmm.
and does it increase your valuation? right? Because all of those things, like if those things are happening, then that problem that you're holding up here that you're trying to fix is getting fixed. And the suppliers are seeing value because they're paying you, and customers are seeing value because they're joining you in your droves. And then once that naturally increases the valuation of a business, that just gives you more options for you to scale that business, finance that business, reward the team, or push bonuses out. So, like acquisition, everything sort of stems from those three.
That's good. All right, I've got a couple questions. One, I want to hit you with that we don't have on our plan here, but I'm kind of interested to hear. Are there industries or types of marketplaces that tend to need to be built to be more selective on their supply side, and some that are going to be less selective? Like, what in your experience have you seen are there any trends that you could point out that help indicate whether it's important to be, really, really heavily selective on qualifying your supply side or not?
I think it just comes down to, let's say, the average order value and the type of products that's being sold, or the type of service that's being offered. Wish is a pretty good marketplace. I'm not sure I'd buy a lot of stuff from it. It all looks a bit weird, to be quite honest. If they started selling services to come and fit granite work surfaces in a new kitchen, I might probably not think of Wish.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is just too broad to answer that. It's, the entrepreneurs or the startup founders will know, either they're running the company right now and they'll know who are our ideal sort of customer, and who does that match with our supplier, or the other way around, they'll be thinking of it. And it's fairly, like, we don't need to get bogged down in kind of market research to probably take a stab at like some of that. If you are selling services that are going to be a service that is going to build something into your house that's going to last for 10 years, you're probably going to curate that a lot more than if you are selling all of the dodgy cables that come up at the top of all of the Amazon listings for their own brand
Mm-hmm.
products.
That's really good. Is there anything that marketplace leaders don't really think about when in this area, like something that tends to get overlooked, or for good or for bad? Is there anything that you see that's just kind of missing from the conversation?
Well, I don't think that most, certainly, let's say from a startup perspective, from startup founders that I speak with, I don't think enough people deliver content. And content is king in this situation. It's a fine balancing act to walk through, because depending on the sort of marketplace that you're running, sometimes the supplier doesn't need to be known. I mean, if you think of the last thing that you bought on Amazon, can you even remember who sold it? Was it Amazon? Was it someone else? Like, literally, who knows? And that's really damaging for a lot of brands and retailers who've basically fueled that and created a landlord for themselves. But equally, other marketplaces are fine with, let's say, the suppliers being somewhat anonymous, and with the marketplace taking most of the ownership and the brand equity. So it really depends what sort of marketplace you're trying to build there. But ultimately, whichever marketplace you're building, you either need to produce a ton of content that is going to be brand equity that exists in perpetuity for you to promote yourself as the destination, or you're going to work with your suppliers and come up with something that is going to be collaborative, that makes you both stronger and makes 1+1 = 3.
That's really, really good. Thomas, I feel like you have packed into like every answer so much helpful stuff that I'm going to even give this a couple listens myself, just to try to learn everything that you've said today. It's been really good. I think for listeners too, it's really helpful to just walk away with one thing to remember. And from all of your experience doing this, I think you'd have probably something good to take away. Like, what's the most important thing you've shared today? What's the big takeaway that you would want all of the listeners to have?
For any leader, anyone who is building a marketplace, any entrepreneur, any founder, any CEO, the hardest thing that I've personally found to deal with running my own startup for 3.5 years is just how difficult it can be to work out what's an excuse and what's a reason. And I say that through the lens of someone that's raised money and raised venture capital money as well. And that's incredibly hard to do. Those investor calls are super, super difficult because almost all of the time that you are being given a reason for no, it's not actually a reason, it's an excuse. And even if you were to go and fix that, I say fix it or hit that milestone or whatever, the reality is that you wouldn't end up securing the investment. And so it's not a reason, it's an excuse. But actually, more and more, I understand that that's how a lot of things work. That's how a lot of commercial deals work. That's how a lot of partnerships, if they don't work, but maybe they would work if you do this. What you really need to develop is this innate sixth sense or gut feeling on when something is not happening. Is there a reason that that's not happening? Or is someone really just giving you an excuse? And once you can kind of define the two and understand the difference, actually that helps you focus on what you need to focus on. Is that really a customer objection? Is that really a supplier issue that they don't want to come onto the platform? Because if it is, and it is a reason, then you can fix it. And then you get your business forward a little bit more. If it's an excuse, it's an awful lot of wasted energy. So that's always the bit that I think through the lens of a startup founder, you need to get like bulletproof excellent at trying to work out. What's an excuse? What's a reason?
What's an excuse and what's a reason is really good. We've talked a lot about qualifying supply side. I think it's really helpful to hear your experience in building aisle 3, the approach that you've taken. I think it's really helpful to hear like there is still so much room even in the marketplace model to grow and to innovate in the way that we're doing things. And I love hearing people that come out and find new ways to serve sellers and buyers and gig workers and every other side of marketplaces that there could be. You have to serve all of your customers well. And I just love hearing the innovative approaches that you've taken and the thoughtfulness that have been behind them. I think that's really helpful for the audience. It's really helpful for me. So thank you for coming on and sharing about that. That's really good. And I just want to encourage the listeners of the podcast, please go and connect with Thomas on LinkedIn or go follow him because look, I've been following him and I've been growing a lot reading through the stuff that he's sharing. It's really helpful. It's really good. And he's active there. So please go and follow him. And I know we've got, we mentioned earlier, some books that you've written and TikTok. And so all of that kind of stuff is going to be in the show notes. Go follow him on TikTok as well. Go check out his book. And I also want to give you a chance here, Thomas, just to talk about Startup Lounge, which I know something that you've started. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And there'll be a link to this in the show notes as well.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, you're beginning to make it sound like it's a proper book that I wrote, Brooks. I've been running pub crawls for my birthday around London for 16 years. This was the 16th year. And I realized it's an awful lot of work to compile those routes and all the notes and like produce a leaflet for everyone that comes on to the pub crawls so they can see where they're walking around, find out about the pubs, find out about the landmarks, everything. I thought, I wonder if I've got any of those previous years whilst I'm doing this 16. And I did, I had 12. And so that's why it's a really strange number. It's 13 historic pub crawls through London for my first book. But actually, what's been really interesting is taking that book and going round to all of the pubs that are in that book on a TikTok channel that didn't exist 6 weeks ago and is actually now 12,000. It got to 12,000 people today. It's 19th of October I launched it, and it's the 28th of November, if that gives away like the filming date here. So not very long at all to get to a very large number. And that also goes back to some of the things that I think that when you're building a business, when I talk about content, it doesn't have to be going to an agency and having an agency try and charge you £50,000 £50,000, £50,000 a month to go and produce a little bit of content. Like you can do that yourself. You know the problem, you know what you're trying to solve, and you know how that resonates with both your buyers and suppliers. You can probably figure some of that stuff out. Or you can go and find some people that you can work with. At A3, we went to like 0 to 33,000. It took us about 6 months to do that. And that was through getting three really young, talented people who love sneakers and fashion to just talk about the thing that they like doing to an audience that care. I used to send them down Oxford Street into JD Sports and Foot Locker with my credit card, and they would buy a few £100 worth of shoes each, come back to the office and film everything that afternoon and then take it back. So there really is no barrier there's no excuse for any business not to be creating content that is going to put their brand top of mind. And so that's what I talk about when I talk about helping other founders through Startup Lounge, having been both someone who's been an employee in a startup that's not worked, been my own founder, and all the different like highs and lows that happen with that. You know what I think about the life a startup founder has with, let's say, 7 plates spinning. Sometimes you need someone to maybe kind of hold one of the poles and stop that plate shaking quite so much. Sometimes you need someone to just take it off your hands. And sometimes you need someone to say, look, you can let that one drop. That doesn't matter anymore.
That's really good. I love, Thomas, hearing the emphasis on just brand recognition, brand affinity that you have. I think that is incredibly undervalued in a lot of businesses. And for me, I talked about this a lot, but every time an industry starts to diminish or companies start to go into a downturn, people start asking, there's some people winning right now. There's some companies that are growing. How are they growing? What are they doing? We need to do what they're. And every time I look at it, I'm like, the companies that are resilient and continue to grow, and especially to scale, they are almost always winning on brand. It's always brand affinity, brand recognition. And so I love hearing you talk about that. That's really good, and it's close to home for me and for things that I care about. So that's awesome.
Yes.
And we'll
Well,
link to Startup Lounge as well in the show notes there.
Well, it's more than that though, Brooks. I would say, like you can see that there's almost that false sense of security when people look at the numbers and think about, let's say, like bottom of the funnel performance marketing, something like that, right? There's things that don't get cut. You know, you don't necessarily cut. Like you often see businesses, they cut salespeople because they go, well, they're too expensive. Well, they're too expensive because they're getting paid a lot of commission because they're doing a lot of deals. If that doesn't happen, then it doesn't flow through. And it's really, and the winners, unfortunately, a lot of the time are the platforms that basically make themselves a landlord. So it's much easier to be the performance marketing person who is looking at that click onto Google Shopping for that thing that someone bought. But really, like, I don't think this is a controversial thing to say. I don't think many conversions happen that much by just someone going onto a search, seeing that one thing, clicking straight through, and then buying everything there and then. Like, there's an affinity somewhere else. They saw the banner on the train. They heard the little earworm jingle on the radio. Like something else has happened. And it's no coincidence that, like, sure, like when budgets get tightened, those guys at the bottom of the funnel get squeezed more because they've got to work a lot harder because they're losing all of this brand equity that exists everywhere else. And that's a balancing act. When you are building a marketplace, you have to try and find a balancing act, again, depending on whether it's important for you to be the destination and known as the destination, or for you to be the destination but is more of a facilitator that is making people aware of all of the unique brands or suppliers or services or whatever you're trying to do. And you've got to try and strike that balancing act. But then once you kind of figure that out, like you really need to lean in hard, like either for yourself because it's just you that's responsible for that, or you've got to collaborate with your suppliers.
That's good. I love we've thrown in that. Again, it goes to show the uniqueness of marketplaces too. But I love that we've thrown in some extra value here on the marketing and brand side of this, which is awesome. So as we're coming to a close here, Thomas, I just want to say again how much I appreciate you, all you've shared, and reiterate to the audience to go and check out everything that you're doing. If there's anything else you want to share a link to, feel free to let me know. And otherwise, to the rest of you guys, thanks for coming along on the journey of learning with us about building and growing and leading marketplaces. It's really an awesome model in the world right now, and I think bringing a lot of ingenuity and a lot of help to a lot of places. So love it. Love everything you're doing, Thomas, and we will stay connected and maybe even have you on again in the future, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Brooks.
Yeah. All right, audience, we will see you guys in the next episode.